Have you ever been treated as if you were invisible, even in your own home? Have you ever felt that, after a certain age, you become a nuisance, a burden the family tries to hide? On my grandson's birthday, my daughter-in-law looked me up and down and said, with the greatest naturalness in the world, "We're having important guests. You can eat in the kitchen." She didn't look me in the eye. She didn't invite me to the table. She didn't even give me the right to respond. And there, with the still empty plate in my hands, I made a decision. I said nothing. I just smiled, as if I understood the message, and walked slowly to the back of the house. The kitchen was clean, quiet, and cold. Not because of the weather, but because of what it feels like to be left out. I sat there, alone, listening to the laughter coming from the dining room. They toasted, spoke loudly, and for a moment I swore I heard my name whispered, but not as part of the conversation, but as someone to be avoided. Have you ever been there? Stay with me until the end. What you discover now may surprise you. As I ate, memories began to flood my mind. I remembered the first time I held my grandson in my arms. I remembered helping my son buy that house, yes, the same one where today I'm treated like an inconvenient guest. I remembered the late nights, the laundry, the advice given and ignored. And there, at that cold kitchen table, surrounded by silence, a question echoed within me. At what point did I stop being part of the family and become a ghost? This isn't just another sad story about an ignored woman. It's a true story. One of those stories we only believe because we live it. A story about the contempt many elderly people face, about the silent disrespect within the homes they're supposed to protect. It's about those voices no one wants to hear, but which have so much to say. If you're here, perhaps you've felt something similar. Maybe you know someone who lives in silence, like me. Or maybe this story will open your eyes to something that's always been there, but that you've never truly seen. It's not easy to tell this. It's not easy to relive every detail of that humiliation. But I need you to hear it. I need you to see what came next. Because that night, something in me changed. I stopped accepting, and without raising my voice, without threatening anyone, I began to plan. Not for revenge, but to regain the dignity they took from me, or at least tried to take. And that's how it all began. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring into space, trying to understand where along the way everything had gone astray. Like someone who had once cared for, fed, protected, I was now set aside, as if I were a nuisance, as if I had already fulfilled my purpose and could be cast aside. The silence of the early morning only made everything clearer. I was no longer seen. I was no longer heard. And that hurt more than any harsh words. As I relived every detail of that night, I realized that what hurts most isn't being forgotten. It's being remembered only when it's convenient. Helping when money's tight. Staying with grandchildren when there's no one to care for them, but sitting at the table, that's too much. And perhaps you, listening to my story now, have felt that way too. Perhaps you've been silenced, ignored, left aside by the ones you love most. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to share what bothered you most. Sometimes, venting helps. And when we share, others realize they're not alone. Your story can touch someone too. And if you feel this kind of content resonates with you, like this video. This shows YouTube that these stories, which many prefer to pretend don't exist, need to be heard. And if you want to continue following these true soul-stirring stories, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here makes all the difference. It's what keeps this space alive, welcoming, and authentic. A space where the voices no one hears finally find attentive ears. The next morning, I woke up different. No longer the one who accepted everything silently. I had a plan. I've always been a simple woman. I never needed much. A clean corner, a bit of silence, and the joy of seeing my family well. I was never one for parties, loud talk, or imposing my presence. I preferred to take care of things from behind, waking up before everyone else, making coffee, leaving the clothes ironed, lunch ready. I always thought that was enough to be seen, to be loved. But over time, I realized that the love that grows accustomed to what is guaranteed also allows itself to forget. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 76 years old. I've been a widow for almost a decade, and I live with my son Brian and his wife, Samantha. They have 2 young children, my grandchildren, and since I moved here after my husband's death, I've tried to be as lighthearted as possible. I've never complained. I've never imposed an opinion. I've just wanted to help. I sew by hand. I always have. When I first arrived here, I made the crib sheets, fixed the torn living room curtain, mended Brian's shirt collars, not because anyone asked, but because that's what I knew how to do. It was my way of showing care, of being helpful, and, as much as possible, that's how I stayed afloat. Some people anchor themselves in grand plans, in goals, in success. I anchor myself in small gestures, in the behind the scenes of everyday life, in the kindness no one sees. There were days when I'd sit alone in the backyard, with the yarn in my lap, just to make room inside the house. I'd hear the children's laughter through the window, Samantha's hurried footsteps moving from one room to the next, and I was happy to know they had a life. I didn't want to be a burden. I never did, so I was content to observe. I was content to be there. But it's curious how, even without saying a word, we accumulate little scars, a door that closes too quickly, a thank you that never comes, an impatient look when you try to tell someone something, little things, details, but together, they become heavy, and we start to feel like we're being left over. I remember one specific day, a few months before the dinner when everything fell apart. Samantha had gone to work and left the children with me. The youngest had a fever, and I spent the afternoon holding him, wetting a diaper with fresh water, singing softly. When she returned, tired, she didn't even look at me. She just picked the boy up, smelled his hair, and left. She didn't even ask how he was. She didn't even say, "Good afternoon." And I thought, maybe she didn't even notice. But that stayed with me. These small absences are like drops of water on stone. Once, twice, 10 times, until a crack appears. I kept sewing, I kept washing the dishes, preparing the food, but inside, my presence began to turn into silence. I saw how invisible my existence had become, and with it came the feeling that, no matter how much I had helped build that house, not with bricks, but with sacrifices, with presence, with karai, was no longer a part of it. Maybe you understand what I'm saying. Maybe you've also felt like a secondary character in your own story. Maybe, like me, you've learned to mask your pain with busyness, to swallow your words, to smile even when your chest feels heavy. But that day, that birthday, the way she said it, it was different. It was as if, all at once, all the layers of kindness were ripped away. As if I'd been placed, without warning, on the outside of the story. And it was at that moment that something inside me awakened. Not loudly, not angrily, but clearly, as if a veil had fallen. And I understood that expecting respect from those who don't see you isn't kindness, it's self-forgetfulness. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible? One word is enough. I'll read it. That day seemed ordinary. The table was set with care. The new tablecloth I'd sewn myself weeks before. The glasses lined up like one of those dinners in a magazine. I helped prepare everything. I washed the vegetables, chopped the garlic, and cooked the rice while Samantha fixed her hair upstairs. It wasn't the first time she'd had co-workers over, but something about that night felt different. A certain nervousness in the air, as if I were an out-of-place detail. When the guests arrived, I noticed her avoiding me with her eyes. She greeted the others enthusiastically, showing them around the house, the new paintings, the newly delivered sofa. But when he saw me at the kitchen door, he simply said, "Okay, Margaret," and walked on. I wasn't expecting affection, but I was expecting to be noticed. Even so, I kept to myself, as always, until dinner time. The chairs were taken one by one. Laughter rippled through the room. Samantha poured wine, Brian told some old work story, and I, plate in hand, approached the table, hoping to sit in silence. I didn't ask for anything. Not a single space. Not even attention. But before I could pull out my chair, I heard the words, quietly, almost gentle, but sharp as a razor. "Not there, Margaret. We have an important visitor. You can eat in the kitchen, right?" Time stood still for a second. My son didn't say anything. Neither did the guests. No one thought it was strange. I smiled. I simply smiled. I nodded, as if it made perfect sense, and returned to the kitchen with my plate still empty. I sat alone. I heard distant voices, words I couldn't understand, as if a door had been closed between me and the rest of the house. And, in a way, that's exactly what happened. I was thrown out without moving. Asterisk as I chewed slowly, a thick silence settled inside me. It wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper. A raw realization, like someone finally seeing the hidden truth behind relationships that feign harmony. I wasn't part of that home. I was a service, a function, an old ornament that no one has the courage to throw away, but that you also don't want to leave on display. At that moment, my mind began to revisit moments I'd previously tried to justify: the lack of an invitation to previous dinners, the impatient look when I approached the room, the way Samantha spoke of me to others, always in the past tense. She used to have her own house. She was a seamstress. She took care of her sick husband, always in the past tense, as if I no longer existed. The pain didn't come as a scream. It came as a silent revelation. I understood that this was no longer about coexistence. It was about blind acceptance of an imposed place where my presence was only welcome when convenient, as long as it was discreet, as long as it was silent. The kind of presence that serves coffee but doesn't sit at the table. And at that moment, something inside me reorganized. It wasn't an outburst. It was a clarity, a kind of internal awakening that made me look around and realize that that kitchen wasn't a punishment. It was a place of decision. For the first time in a long time, I realized I had choices, and that the whole situation, even cloaked in false cordiality, was a reflection of a common mentality that older people should only serve, never occupy. From that moment on, my journey was no longer about forcing myself into space. It became about regaining my dignity, silently stolen. I understood that my transformation would not come through confrontation, but through decisions, small, discreet, profound ones. And when I returned to sewing, days later, I realized that each stitch I made in the fabric was a kind of basting of my own strength. I didn't want war, I wanted awareness. And it all began that night. If this part of the story touched you in any way, write the word in the comments. Injustice sometimes. Just one word is enough to say it all. As I stood there in the kitchen, with that nearly untouched plate before me, my mind drifted into memories I hadn't invited. Memories surfaced like old scenes from a movie only I remembered experiencing, and perhaps because no one else seemed to remember, they came back even more powerfully. I remembered the day I sold my only valuable piece of jewelry, a gold bracelet my husband gave me for our 25th wedding anniversary. It wasn't for the piece itself, but for what it represented. He had gone to great lengths to buy it. It was a symbol of affection, of our journey, of everything we'd built together with so much sweat. But at that time, Brian needed a car to get his new job. He said it was a life-changing opportunity, and it was. I went to the jewelry store alone, handed over the bracelet, and left with the money folded inside my bra. I didn't tell him what I'd done. I just handed him the envelope and said, "Buy what you need, son. Everything will be fine." He cried, but I think he's forgotten. I also remember the nights I pretended I wasn't hungry so there would be more food left for him. I'd say I'd already eaten. I lied naturally. A mother learns to lie out of love from an early age. I remember counting pennies to pay for college books, sewing late into the night to supplement my income. I remember not buying myself medicine, just to make sure he had everything he needed. And he did. What hurts isn't what I did. It was all out of love. It's realizing that none of it seems to have remained anywhere in their memory. As if that woman there, sitting in the kitchen, with the plate on her lap, was just a supporting character in the story. As if I was never truly part of the journey that led them there. Do we expect gratitude? Not exactly, but we do expect recognition. We expect our sacrifices to leave a mark on those who receive them. We expect people to carry at least a vivid memory of what you once were for them. We expect that, when preparing dinner, someone will remember that you once gave up your own food to put bread on the table. But the hidden truth, which many don't like to admit, is that memory is selective, and those who are accustomed to receiving don't always bother to remember who gave it. This realization transformed me. It didn't harden MIT, awakened me. It was like opening an inner door and, for the first time, looking clearly at everything I'd stopped being to conform to what others expected. An invisible woman, submissive, discreet, who never bothers, but who also isn't heard. It was then that I understood. It's not enough to give. You have to preserve who you are while you give, because if you give everything of yourself and disappear in the process, in the end, no one will remember who you were. They'll only remember what you served. And the most ironic thing about all this is that they're only in this house at lavish table, under that roof, because I once gave up everything that was mine. I gave up my time, my body, my money, my dreams. But no one sees, no one speaks, no one thanks me. And deep down, maybe they hope I don't even remember it anymore. But I do. I remember every choice, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. I remember who I was when they were still nobody. That night didn't break me completely. It reconnected me with parts of myself I'd hidden behind the scenes. It made me revisit my history, my behind the scenes, my silent truths. And it was in that reunion that I realized I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to remind myself of everything I once was. If you've read this far and know what this kind of silence that no one respects is, leave your word in the comments. Memory. Because sometimes, what saves us is exactly that. Not forgetting. After that night, something in me went silent and something else awoke. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't anger. It was a quiet clarity, as if, from within, I was reorganizing everything I knew about myself. I began to see the house with new eyes. The same walls, the same floor, but now, with a new awareness. I wasn't a guest there. I wasn't a favor. I was part of the foundation, even if they'd forgotten that. And that changed everything. In the following days, I did everything as I always did. I woke up early, made coffee, tidied the kitchen. I did laundry, watered the plants, sewed a new dress for my granddaughter. No one suspected a thing. But deep down, every gesture was different. I wasn't doing it to be accepted anymore. I was doing it for myself, by choice, and, at the same time, observing everything, in silence, like someone studying the behind the scenes of a scene they always thought they knew, but now saw in a different light. I began to pay attention to every detail, in the conversations that excluded me, in the quick glances, in the small comments thrown out as if unaware of the person's presence. The curious thing is that, when you begin to see clearly, nothing seems casual anymore. Everything carries weight. Everything communicates. And I saw clearly how my presence was treated as something to be tolerated, never celebrated. But I no longer wanted tolerance. I wanted freedom. I wanted space. I wanted to be my own person again, not as revenge, but as a return home toward myself, a reconnection with the woman I was back then, before I gave up everything for my family. And it was in this rediscovery that the decision was born. I started asking questions, not out loud, but to myself. Who pays for what? Whose name is the house in? Where are the land documents? What bills are passed through me without my knowledge? I'd never worried about these things. I'd always trusted. I'd always delivered. But now, I wanted to know. Because a conscious woman is a woman no one can manipulate. And I was becoming that woman again. One afternoon, while folding laundry in my room, I remembered a phrase my father had said when I was a girl. Those who keep quiet too much, choke. And I realized I'd been choking for a long time. Choking on everything I'd never said, on everything I'd endured in silence, thinking it was a virtue, but it was forgetfulness. My own self-forgetfulness. That's why I started recording the little things, not with cameras or cell phones, but with active memory. I'd grab an old notebook and jot them down. Dates, phrases, gestures, everything I'd previously ignored that now served as a warning, as material for analysis. It was my way out of invisibility. I no longer accepted being an extra. If someone tried to erase me again, this time I'd have vivid memories, silent proof, well-crafted arguments. And along with this new attitude, another part of me grew stronger, the part that understands the power of a good choice, because true transformation doesn't happen when we explode. It happens when we change from within, when we begin to act with intention, when each step has purpose. And that's what I started doing. Small, firm steps, guided by a new mindset. That of someone who finally understood that dignity isn't asked for, it's exercised. I still did the same tasks, but behind every movement, there was a woman awake, who observed, who evaluated, who, above all, no longer waited for permission to exist. If you have ever experienced this kind of silence, where everything seems normal, but you know it isn't, write the word in the comments conscience, because it is from there that the greatest turnarounds are born. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun hadn't even overcome the early morning chill. and I was already out on the street with my old purse and a folder of documents in my hands. I walked slowly to the bus stop, as if I were running some errand. Number 1 at home noticed me leaving. No one asked where I was going. And honestly, it didn't hurt, because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going out to do anything for anyone. That trip was my own. It was my own step, part of a decision I had made silently. That day, I was going to the notary's office. The wait in line was long. The attendant was young, spoke quickly, and treated me as if I were just another old woman with questions about her paperwork. But when he saw the house registration number, the same one where I lived with my son, daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren, his expression changed. "This property is still in your name, Mrs. Margaret. No transfer has ever been made." I nodded in thanks and feigned surprise. But inside, I was resolute. I needed to hear it for myself. To know, without a shadow of a doubt, that this house was mine. It still was, legally, and that changed everything. I walked home with the same slow steps as before, but the weight I carried was different. I was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. I was remembering who I was, because there's a strength that comes when we recognize our own worth, not through the eyes of others, but through the truth of the facts. And the fact was simple. Everything they had there began with me. The next day, I went to the bank. I opened a new account, just for me. I updated my address, requested a new password, and updated my phone number. I did everything at my own pace, with the patience of someone who's lived long enough to know that haste doesn't equal power. Then, I sat on a park bench for a few minutes, and people watched. Men in ties, rushing to work, young people with headphones on, mothers in a hurry, with children in their arms. And there I was, invisible to everyone, but more present in myself than ever. The following week, I sought out a lawyer, a mature woman with firm eyes and a gentle voice. I told my story without embellishment or exaggeration. I spoke about the house, the lack of recognition, the humiliations that had been accumulating. In silence, she listened attentively, and when I finished, she simply said, "You don't need to fight, you just need to take a stand." That stayed with me, like a key turning within my soul. It wasn't about war, it was about clarity, about transformation, about quietly taking charge. With the contract in hand and all the information organized, I returned home and continued my routine as normal. I cooked, did laundry, played with my granddaughter, but now each action had a different energy. I knew what they didn't. I knew that the house where they'd told me to eat in the kitchen was, in fact, mine. I knew I could leave at any time, or ask someone else to leave. I knew I was no longer emotionally dependent on that space, and that gave me a strange, beautiful, silent peace. It wasn't revenge, it was freedom, knowing that, at any moment, I could turn the tables. That hidden contempt no longer had a foothold, because now, I was no longer a shadow. I was a woman, with proof, with rights, with power. I began to notice the reactions. Samantha seemed even more at ease. She believed I was still in that state of submission, of silence. Little did she know that what appeared to be stillness was just preparation. Brian continued to notice nothing, perhaps because he thought motherhood was eternal, immobile, predictable, but I was somewhere else, an inner place of deep observation, behind the scenes, and this whole journey was about to take a turn that no one there could have foreseen. If you've ever been through something similar, where the truth was just with you for a while, write the word in the comments "secret." Because sometimes, it is in what no one sees that our greatest strength lies. Every time I woke and saw that house full of life, full of sounds that didn't include me, I remembered what I had discovered, and it gave me strength. The feeling of invisibility still lingered, but now it no longer defined me. I knew what I carried, I knew what I had built, and I knew, above all, that I was no longer in the dark. There are things we keep inside for a long time, and when you finally find light within, there's no going back. So, if something in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell us what bothered you most, or share something you've experienced. Many people will recognize themselves in your words. Sometimes, a rant you share here helps someone else feel less alone. And if you feel like this content touches you, represents you, or simply makes you think like the video, It's a simple yet powerful way to show YouTube that these stories deserve to be shared with more people, because while many make noise about trivialities, there are real lives like mine, like yours, that need to be heard. And if you want to follow me on this journey, following real stories that speak of transformation, emotional underbelly, and decisions that change everything, subscribe to the channel. This is where we meet. This is where these silent voices finally gain a voice. In the following days, I continued observing. The following Sunday, the house was full. Samantha prepared everything with that exaggerated enthusiasm that only appears when guests are involved. The most expensive china was on the table. The crystal glasses were cleaned with vinegar, and the smell of roasting was in the air. Brian was wearing the shirt I had ironed the night before, distracted by his cell phone, while the children ran around the living room. I, as always, was in the back of the kitchen, silent but watching every movement. It wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't absence. It was strategic presence. It was the conscious waiting of someone who already knew the right moment to take a stand. Every word spoken in that house passed through my ears like a piece of a puzzle I'd already put together. I was ready. Samantha passed me twice, pretending not to see me. When she saw me, she simply asked me not to disturb her, because Brian's friends from the firm were coming. I swallowed the sentence slowly. I had already chewed on something much more bitter. And then, when everyone was seated at the table, laughing, toasting, and helping themselves freely in that room that had always been mine, too, I walked in. I didn't clap. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked in with firm steps, holding the envelope in both hands, and walked to side. She was surprised. She looked confused, but she didn't have time to ask anything. I placed the envelope on the table next to her plate, looked my daughter-in-law in the eye for the first time in a long time, and said, in a low voice, but firm, enough to silence the entire room, "The house is mine. It's in my name. It always has been, and you are being kindly asked to leave it." The fork fell from the plate. Brian froze. No one moved. The silence, which had previously been my companion in humiliation, was now the stage for my comeback. Samantha tried to laugh, as if she thought it was a joke, but I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. There was no longer any room for doubt. In that envelope were copies of the house documents, the notary's office documents, the new bank account documents, the power of attorney, signed by my lawyer. Everything organized, dated, with witnesses. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. She stammered something about "what do you mean?" but I didn't let the confusion grow. I added, "I served you. I respected you. I kept quiet for too long. But today, I respect myself more than I obey you. This house is not yours, and you no longer have a place to hide the contempt you feel for me." The expression on her face changed color, from a sneer to the pallor of reality. Brian tried to say something, but couldn't find the words. Maybe because, deep down, I knew he'd let this happen, that he'd remained silent along with her, that he'd watched me pass by so many times and said nothing. And now, the truth wasn't just in me anymore. It was there, on the table, in front of everyone, like a dish served too late. The visitors changed. The subject lowered their eyes and stood up awkwardly. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring not only at my daughter-in-law, but also at the old version of myself, who would accept anything in the name of peace. But that woman was no longer there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a fuss, because those who are confident in their own worth don't need an audience. They just take a stand. And that day, at that table, that's exactly what I did. If you've ever experienced something similar, where justice came silently but surely, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Turn, because sometimes it is what defines who we become later. She left 3 days later. There was no fuss, no suitcase thrown out the window, no shouts at the gate. Samantha packed her things in silence that morning, while the children were still asleep. I saw her coming down the stairs with a box in her arms, her eyes puffy, no makeup, no rush. For the first time in years, she looked me straight in the eye. She said nothing, and neither did I. It wasn't pride. It was peace. There's no pleasure in seeing someone leave, even when their exit is fair, and I didn't want revenge. I wasn't rooting for anyone's suffering, but what I saw in that moment was consequence, not punishment. It was the natural result of a choice. Disrespecting someone, thinking they'd never react. But one day, life teaches us. It teaches us slowly. It teaches us the way it needs to teach us. And no one escapes that. Brian tried to talk to me the next day. He sat on the couch, head down, like a boy who knows he's done something wrong but still doesn't know how to apologize. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that she overreacted, that he didn't realize, that he was overwhelmed with work, with the kids, with life. I listened to it all. Silently, I let him talk. And then I simply said, I was overwhelmed too, for many years, but I never allowed myself to disrespect anyone because of it. He lowered his head. He left for his room without another word. For the next few days, the house was strangely quiet. The children felt the absence, asking why their mother was taking so long to return, and I responded lovingly, without blaming anyone. I simply said that sometimes adults need time to think things through. I didn't want to fuel their anger. They weren't to blame for anything. On the contrary, they were the only lights that still illuminated that house in so many dark moments. And there began a new phase, a phase of reconstruction, not revenge. I continued to take care of things the way I always had, but without fading away. I began choosing the moments I wanted to be present. If they didn't invite me to the table, I didn't offer myself either. If they needed my help, I first asked if they were ready to respect me. And little by little, the house learned to see me differently. Not because I changed the tone of my voice, but because I changed the place from which I spoke. There is a kind of silent power that comes from consciousness. It's not the kind of power that screams, that demands. It's the kind that imposes itself through the firmness of being whole within oneself. I stopped accepting emotional crumbs. I stopped begging for affection in the name of harmony. I stopped interpreting contempt as the hard way of others, because the truth is simple. Those who love you don't hide you. Those who respect you listen to you. Those who value you see you. And when you see yourself again, when you recognize yourself after so long being lost, everything changes. Your mindset changes. Your way of walking changes. Even silence takes on a new sound. There was no more room inside me for pity. There was only room for truth. And this truth, even if lonely at first, brought me back to a place I should never have left, my own center. If at any point in your life you have seen someone fall under the weight of their own choices, without you having to do anything, write the word here in the comments, because sometimes time is the best mirror. That morning, the house was silent. Soft light streamed in through the kitchen window, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden table. I prepared my coffee as I always did, boiled water in the kettle, 2 scoops of grounds, and brewed slowly. There was no rush, no expectations. Just this moment of mine, which had seemed small before and now carried another weight, that of belonging. I sat alone, as I had so often before, but this time it wasn't loneliness, it was solitude, the kind of silence that no longer hurts, the kind of emptiness we learn to fill with presence. Samantha's absence, Brian's distance, the subtle distance from the children, all of it still weighed heavily, of course, but it didn't make me retreat. Because where there had once been anguish, there was now clarity. The truth is that every decision has a price, and sometimes the price of dignity is losing the roles others have given us. I lost the title of the good mother-in-law, the one who accepts everything, who keeps quiet to avoid conflict, who lives on the fringes to avoid disturbing the center. But in exchange, I regained the title I had long forgotten to carry, that of woman, a woman with history, with value, with limits. And there's no going back. I still miss my grandson, his laughter running around the house, the way he'd call me to play with blocks or watch his favorite cartoon on TV. These are recent memories, but they already seem like they're from another time. And yes, my heart aches at the thought that he might grow up with a distorted version of history. But I know the truth has deep roots. One day, when he's able to understand, it will find its way to him, and what's true will remain. For a long time, I thought that loving meant not imposing yourself, that caring meant denying yourself, that protecting meant accepting everything. But maturity taught me that love without respect is just emotional dependence disguised as virtue, that care without reciprocity becomes service, and that protecting those who hurt you is allowing injustice to take root within your own home. When I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Not a tired old woman, nor a faded grandmother, but a woman with the scars of life, with history in her eyes, with decisions in her body, a woman who chose to get up from her kitchen chair and reclaim her own name. No one needs to applaud me. I don't want medals, but there's something powerful in no longer needing validation from those who diminished you, in not apologizing for existing, in sitting at your own table and knowing that your presence is enough. The pain still visits from time to time, because the affection we shared doesn't disappear overnight. But now, it doesn't paralyze me. It just reminds me of everything I faced to be here, whole, with courage, with awareness, with determination. And if someone ever asks me why I did all this, I'll answer simply, because I'm tired of living in the draft of my own story. I've decided to sign the end of my chapter with truth. If this part of my journey touched you in any way, write the word in the comments dignity, because sometimes it's just her that we need to rescue to find ourselves again. I'm not perfect. I've kept quiet when I should have spoken. I've accepted little, thinking it was enough. I've confused obedience with respect, and for a long time, I believed that love was proven by silence mine. But the truth is, silence is only beautiful when it isn't born of pain, and mine was born of much. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see just an old lady with wrinkles or a grandmother who everyone thinks lives to take care of others. I see a woman who chose to no longer be a shadow, who chose not to hide behind the title of nice to maintain a peace that was never true. And that didn't make me bitter, it made me fair, with myself first. And that changes everything. Life has this curious way of testing us. It doesn't ask if we're ready. It just puts the truth in front of us and waits. It waits for us to decide. It waits for us to take a stand. And often, the greatest courage isn't in shouting or confronting, but in looking into the eyes of those who belittle you and saying, enough. I've learned, from everything I've experienced, that age doesn't diminish anyone's worth, that there's no hierarchy in respect, and that anyone who tries to diminish you because of your age or your position within a family is usually afraid of what you represent, afraid of the strength you hold, afraid of the history you carry on your back, the one they pretend not to see, but which sustains everything they have today. So, if at any point in your life you're sent to the kitchen, or to some corner, remember, those who hide you fear you, and those who fear you know you have power, because true power doesn't need to be proven, it simply exists. It's in your eyes, in your words, in your posture. It's in your calm when everyone shouts. It's in your presence when everyone tries to erase you. It's in remaining strong, even after everything. I didn't tell this story to be admired. I told it because I know many people are going through the same thing in silence. And because sometimes, listening to someone who has found their own path gives us the courage to look at our own. So, if any of this video's lines resonated with you, write it in the comments. I saw myself in this story because recognizing is the first step to transformation, and every transformation begins like this, with someone finally deciding to see themselves. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story resonated with you, and that's why this channel exists, to give voice to what many people feel but can't always say out loud. So if this narrative touched something deep inside you, leave a comment. This message was for me. I read everything with an open heart. If this connection resonated with you, please leave a like, not only because it helps the video, but because it shows that stories like this still matter. And if you want to continue following these truths we often hide behind everyday life, subscribe. Here we continue to talk, feel, and transform, one chapter at a time. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow along. Sometimes, it's in the next story that you understand a piece of your own.